I have sent. So we shall formally begin our first class today.
Excuse me?
Yes, we can start.
Yes, I have been proposing Sébastien Facio to show one slide of his as a starting point. I would like to use this slide. So, should I commence?
Yes, sir.
All right. This slide that has been produced by the European Parliament shows the place of the European Council. So the European Council on the right column is an institution, it's on the right, where the countries are represented. But in the European Council, the countries are represented by the chief of state or the chief of governments. And there is a president. Today it's a Portuguese president. The president is the broker, the honest broker that's trying to find consensus between the different heads of states and governments. So the Portuguese is not representing Portugal. That will be the Prime Minister of Portugal that will represent Portugal at the level of the European Council. So I'm stressing the importance of the European Council on the account that my first lecture shall deal with the external policy regarding its political aspects. So the political aspects include the elections that took place recently in Venezuela, the war taking place in Kivu, in Goma, in Bukavu, the sanctions against Russia or against Iran. And of course, the political relation the EU is trying to build up with India or with Indonesia or with Thailand. And so that's really decided within the confines of the European Council. Whereas, and that's very confusing for journalists or for European students, below one sees the Council of the European Union. And the Council of the European Union is really the gathering of the ministers in charge of education, in charge of environment, in charge of the economy, in charge of labor protection, and so on and so forth. And the ministers, they do decide to adopt or to reject a proposal from the Commission regarding regulations of harmonizations of the standards to place on the market vegetables, to place on the market grapefruits, to enact the different regulations Sébastien Facio shall comment upon. So this is, just bear in mind this picture because it's really of importance on the account that I shall place the focus mostly on the European Council and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So there's kind of Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Callas, who is heading the configuration of the Minister of Foreign Affairs taking place in the Council of the European Union. And she's also Vice President of the Commissioners. So she has two seats. So it's double seat, Vice President of the European Commission and heading one of the main configuration of the Council of the European Union. But maybe at this stage there were some participants that would like to ask questions before I embark upon more technical issues. I can answer with Sébastien one or two questions, and then I shall move on on the foreign policies, and afterwards I will deal with the common commercial policy, so the trade limb of the foreign policy. There's no question.
I think there was a question before the break. I don't know if we can address it now if you want. But Not sure.
No, maybe it's not there. I will try to put my slides.
Hello.
Just 1 minute. There is a question, I think.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
you're right.
Hello, Professor. Good afternoon. This is Chavi Chaudhary, and I am a doctoral researcher in University of Delhi, and I'm working upon political agency of migrants. So basically, I am into migration studies. So I wanted to ask a question to you. And it is about like in the light of like rising right-wing tendencies and increasing securitization of borders across European nations and European Union, how are the current migration policy frameworks evolving there? And I particularly want to ask about the treatment of migrants from India and Africa. And uh, it would be great if you could also highlight that to what extent do these frameworks reflect a shift towards exclusion? And is there a space for a more inclusive or right-based approach within this particular political climate? It would be great for me if you could like highlight these pointers.
Yes, excellent question. This is really one of the most tricky policies so far. I'm not really working on asylum, but perhaps to give you a greater picture. The member states are heavily divided on the subject matter, in particular asylum. For which reason? The reason is rather simple. There is a regulations on asylum, according to which the first country where the immigrant seeking asylum debarks will be in charge to instruct its file. So it means that, as you are aware, a big part of the immigration is deemed to be illegal, and so the migrants are reaching either the Canary Islands, part of of Spain in the Atlantic, or southern Spain, coming from Morocco, or southern Italy, coming from Libya or Tunisia, or Greece, that's close to the border. So the Italian, the Greek, and the Spanish authorities have been facing significant challenges in coping with huge migration waves, not having sufficient human resource or financial resources to act properly, consistently with basic human rights or fundamental rights. So the lawmakers succeed to conclude lately a deal that gave rise to a number of extremely technical regulations. And the deal is that the other member states that are far away from the Mediterranean, so like Sweden, it's really far away from the Mediterranean, should also take a number of refugees seeking the status of asylum, on the account that there must be solidarity between the member states. So we cannot place all the burden upon the Greek authorities or the Italian authorities that are submerged by hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants. So the idea is, okay, it's a shared burden. And in case some countries are reluctant, so the Polish are extremely reluctant upon taking asylum seekers, then they can pay the others. So they can quit the obligation, provided that they pay 20,000 euros to a fund to help other member states to take over these immigrants. So that's one limb of the pact, of the Migration Pact. The other is the possibility to dismiss the application on specific grounds, among which that the country where the immigrant is coming from is deemed to be saved. The country is listed on a white list encompassing all the safe countries where there are no gross human rights violations. So that will be the case of Senegal or the case of Cameroon, where Cameroon is perhaps not a very good example because there's been a civil war. But Senegal is rather safe in contrast to Burkina Faso, to Mali. So we've been facing many economic migrants from Senegal. So their application should, as a matter of principle, be dismissed or rejected on the account that there is no civil war, there is no human rights abuse in the country. So that's a second limb of the reform. In addition, the EU has been concluding agreements with Turkey, with Tunisia, with Libya, granting significant sums of money, billions of euros, to allow them to handle the migration process. Many NGOs have been criticizing these agreements because Turkey has been very criticized by many NGOs for human rights violations, for the arrest of the mayor of Istanbul. And as you're aware, Libya has been experiencing somewhat a 10 years civil war, and the civil war is not at the end. So that's a third approach. But perhaps Sébastien wishes to complement me. Sébastien? Maybe he's there.
Yes. Sorry, I couldn't manage to unmute myself. But just to complement maybe and to come back on what you said about the different approaches at the national level. There's a lot of controversies, maybe just to complement on some policies that member states want to put in place. So, for example, Italy wanted to and actually opened what I believe is a detention center in Albania, and so to kind of externalize the receiving of migrants to third countries outside of the EU. That has been actually annulled, I think, in Italy by the courts, just as it was in the UK when the previous government wanted to implement a similar facility in Rwanda. And it was also struck down by the courts. And so there's this tendency of externalizing the management of migration outside of the EU for the part of some member states. But I think even in that sense, and to come back to your question about rights-based approach, there's been severe challenges to those policies in the courts. So yeah, but after that, I'm not an expert also on either on migration issues. So that's only like the very general tendencies that we can see, I guess.
Yes. Of importance is the human rights. So the London High Court regarding the agreement that was concluded with between the UK and Rwanda to allow the Rwandese authorities to host a number of refugees reaching the coast of England or the coast of Wales. That the High Court took the view that it was in breach of fundamental rights enshrined in the 1950 Human Rights Conventions. Italian courts have been adjudicating the case regarding the expatriations of applicants from Africa, from the Middle East, to Albania. So there's also an agreement between Albania and Italy regarding these immigrants. And I didn't read the judgments, but these judgments were mentioned to me again by Italian lawyers 2 days ago. But the Human Rights Convention applies directly. So the attorneys of these migrants can invoke the convention, and domestic courts are obligated at least the courts are obligated to apply Article 6 regarding a fair trial. So that's quite important in the litigation. So, but Dr. Piyush Kumar Kirado wanted to ask us a question. Please, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. I am from Vijay Rampura Jain Law College, Bikaner. I'm very grateful to you. I want to ask, sir, that you talking about the fundamental rights and human rights of in European genre. So, sir, my question belongs to the same of the human rights. Sir, I have been done my PhD in the human rights and the prisoner condition. So I want to ask about what is the condition of human rights position in the European area, sir, and what you think that the law should be make more useful for them, and how can we do the betterment for the prisoners behalf of the law and the like as the NGO, etc. So that's my question, sir. How can we improve their lifestyle also and for the betterment of the prisoner? Thank you, sir.
In short, and I would propose that Mr. Facio complements my answer. The EU is based upon fundamental values, among which there is human dignity, freedom, the rule of law, and human rights. The complexity of human rights at European level is the following one. There is not one single source, different sources of fundamental rights. The first source is the one I mentioned just a few minutes ago, is the 1950 Council of Europe Convention on Human Rights. That embraced mostly first generations of human rights, right to practice one's religion, right of associations, right to life, right to privacy, a right to a fair trial or to effective judicial protection, and so on and so forth. The second source was actually developed by the Court of Justice of the EU because the treaties, the initial treaties of the 1950s that were mentioned by Sébastien were economic integration treaties. So there were no Bill of Rights, unlike another constitution, unlike the Indian constitution, for instance. The Bill of Rights was absent. So the Court of Justice, in adjudicating this complex economic case, had to extract from the national case law, from the national traditions in Germany, in France, in the UK, fundamental rights that have been complementing the first generation right enshrined in the Council of Europe Convention. And then in the negotiations that led to the Nice Treaty, so Nice has been a failure because they disagreed, the head of state disagreed about the number of votes each state will have in the Council of Ministers. Nevertheless, they succeed something there was an important achievement. It was the adoption of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So the Charter of Fundamental Rights differed from the 1950, so it's 50 years later, 1950, 2000, differs from the Convention on Human Rights on the grounds that it was a consensus that's been drafted by a convention gathering professors, MPs, national ministers, and it was deemed to reflect the level, the state of protection of fundamental rights across Europe, encompassing also second generation rights where the state authorities are deemed to act positively. So the right to health or the right to environmental protection were not enshrined as a matter of course in the Human Rights Convention of 1950. Of interest is that these three sources are cross-fertilizing each other. So the case law of the General Court and the Court of Justice in Luxembourg constantly contemplate the case law from the Human Rights Court that's based in Strasbourg, that's part of the Council of Europe, but also contemplates the scope of the rights and the principle enshrined in the Charter of 2000 that was adopted in Nice. So and also the case law of the Constitutional Court regarding human rights are not listed in the judgments, but I was told by different judges that they look very carefully at what's being decided by the Belgian Constitutional Court or by the French Conseil Constitutionnel. So indeed, it's there is cross-fertilization regarding human rights. And as a matter of litigation, this is of utmost importance, in particular regarding the digital age. And I imagine Mr. Facio will come back to this issue tomorrow, because some of the regulations he will comment upon are aiming in protecting the privacy of the consumer of electronic devices. And perhaps you wish to compliment me on the matter, Sebastian.
Yes, maybe to complement something regarding the charter. And am I right that your question was also related to the fundamental rights of prisoners?
Yes, yes, sir.
So one specification with the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU is that it's applicable when member states and when EU law is being enforced, and so it's only within that scope when EU law is being enforced by member states that the Charter of Fundamental Rights or by the EU applies. And so related to prisoners, their fundamental right, it would not necessarily apply in this sense, no? And Professor de Sadeleer will maybe complement, but because they are, held in a national criminal system, justice system, it usually would be, I think, national law applying and not necessarily EU law to some extent. But even if the Charter of Fundamental Rights does not apply, the convention, the European Convention of Human Rights would in any case apply. In addition also to the fundamental rights guaranteed in the different national constitutions. But for example, if the GDPR applies to prisoners in prison, so if the General Data Protection Regulation applies to prisoners in a national prison, and that their rights of privacy is not respected in some way, in a prison it's a very complex matter, obviously, because the right of privacy in a prison is not the same as outside. But in that sense, if there is a regulation or a piece of EU legislation that applies to prisoners, then yes, the Charter of Fundamental Rights could apply.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
thanks.
Is there another question? If not, I will just begin with the lectures on the external action. Sebastian, can you see my slides on the screen? My slide?
Yes, sir, we can see your slide.
Okay, you can see my slides.
No. You haven't shared yours. Oh, yes, I think
Okay.
now we can. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so the external action of the EU, in a nutshell, comprises two limbs. there is the genuine political limb regarding the ways in which we support or we oppose third countries. And that's given the regional war and the unrest that's of utmost importance today. And so my first lectures will be dedicated to this political limb. The second lectures will embrace the second limb, the trade limb, or the common commercial policy. And the two limbs are somewhat entangled, intertwined on the account that today's external policy actions encompass also trade. Trade is a venue to achieve peace between nations. It has always been for centuries. And the dividing line between the two limbs is somewhat blurred. And this dividing line is of importance. Why? Because everything, as we stressed an hour ago, is reckoning upon the principle of conferral of powers. And the 27 member states have been conferring specific powers to the EU regarding external actions, but these powers are rather restricted, whereas the 27 member states have been conferring to the EU institution extremely wide powers regarding external trade. So I will try to demonstrate that the two limbs do interact. However, there is an extremely clear dividing line when it comes to the decision-making process and the possibilities for the member state to have some leeway. So the theory is the following one. The member states' foreign affairs ministers can still conduct a national foreign affairs policy. They can go on with their own policy agenda, whereas in the field of foreign trade, the member states are deprived of any room for maneuver. So the treaties, and mostly there are two main treaties, the Treaty on the European Union and the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, but most of the provisions related to the common foreign and security policies are enshrined in the Treaty on the European Union, which is a more policy treatise. And the common foreign and security policies is characterized by its intergovernmentalism. So it means that all the states, all the ministers of foreign affairs are placed upon equal footing. Each minister can use its veto to oppose a unanimous decision. And that has been the matter regarding the recognition of Kosovo as a state. So you remember Kosovo is a part of the former Republic of the Federation of the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia. The federation broke in 1991, and Kosovo was a province of Serbia, was not a republic. And the province decided to secede from Serbia after a long civil war and became independent. But Kosovo is not, the statehood of Kosovo is not recognized by a huge number of countries. Belgium recognized, however, Spain opposed the recognition because the Spanish authorities are too afraid that some parts of Spain might secede and might claim for independence and claim for statehood. And so it means that the common foreign and security policies is characterized by a unanimous approach, whereas the different policy fields ranging from trade to internal market to agriculture are characterized by a supranational method called the communitarized method. In that method is the Council of the Union, so these configurations of different ministers and the European Parliament adopting legislations and directives. And so, given its highly specific institutional nature, the common foreign and security policies cannot be placed on equal footing with other external policies, such as the trade policies. So one is dealing with apples and pears. So here clearly I've been trying to simplify. So on the one,
Can I just intervene, sir? Sorry to
Yes.
disturb, but then the slides are very small and it's not visible. If you
Ah.
could,
it's there too
Maybe
small.
if you put them full screen.
Yes, okay, maybe like this.
Can you make the
And here, is it better?
no, just pin as
no, sir. In the frame, your image is also coming and the slide is also coming. That's why the slides have shrinked. So probably you can just only share the slides.
Sir, once again, can you share once again?
Okay, I'll try to.
Yeah, we have closed the previous link.
Yeah, I have difficulties to cope with
Yeah,
the two.
please open your PPT, your slides. Like
Okay.
fully, then again you go to the Zoom and share once again.
No, it's not working here. Like this? No. No, it's.
Sir, at the bottom of the
Mm,
can
The
you
share button, the green button.
yes.
yes, so that's what I'm doing.
Then you select, yeah.
Okay, or you can send me so that from here I can share for you.
Yes. Yes, that will be easier. We try to fix that later today. Just 1 second. Yeah, it's important, the slides, everything is I will forward this to you. Okay. Okay, let's take a 2 minutes break. I'm sending the slides. So it's the CFSP, huh? I send you the 2 slides.
Okay, right.
Did you got them?
Still, I have not received. Just waiting. Yes, I got it.
Okay. Yes, so if you can open them and I will tell you step by step.
Okay, sure. I should open the file of the CSFP.
Yes, yes, please.
Can you see? Can everyone see me? I mean, see
Yes.
this? Yeah.
But is it okay for the students?
Yes. Is it to the participants? Can you see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So one request, if you could please start the slideshow, would be grateful.
Yes.
Can you see the slides?
Yeah, I can see them.
No,
But
you can
Yes,
about
yes.
participants.
it's possible to increase the It's possible to make them wider.
Yeah, I'll make it.
Please make a presentation mode, sir. If possible.
Yes, like this. That's much
Okay.
better. Yes. Can you put the third one?
The third one. Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
This one?
Yes. So we clearly understand that there is a two-pillar or two-pronged approach. On the one hand, this common foreign and security policy that's completely apart, that's based upon the intergovernmental model, and that requires unanimity among the states, and then a much more sophisticated model encompassing many socio-economic policies where the decisions can be taken by a simple majority in the parliament and a qualified majority among the ministers. And so the common foreign and security policies is more a diplomatic policy, so to speak, whereas the communitarized policy fields are characterized by the legal characters. So it's mostly made of directives and regulation that will have legal effects, binding legal effects. Next slide, please. Next, please. So it means that the 27 ministers of foreign affairs will take the policy decisions without any formal approval of the European Parliament regarding the conduct of the foreign policies, whereas, as Sébastien Facio stressed, be it in agriculture, be it the internal market, be it energy, the legislation is mostly adapted by the ministers and the European Parliament. Next slide, please. Therefore, the common foreign security policies are far less legal characters than the agricultural policy or the digital economy policy, as we will say. So, as we will stress tomorrow. So the common foreign policies exist alongside the minister, the national ministers' foreign policies. The main players in Europe will still be the foreign ministers, the German foreign minister or the French foreign minister. And so they need to cooperate with the Brussels EU diplomacy. So of course, each national foreign ministry must try to cooperate with the EU regarding the foreign policies. They cannot undermine the foreign policy of the EU. Next slide, please. So of interest is that the EU legal order is based upon values, among which one encounters the rule of law, democracy, fundamental rights, freedom, human dignity. But in addition, the foreign policy of the EU must safeguard, as a matter of course, these values. These values are transversals. But in addition, the foreign policies must secure the security, the independence, the integrity of the EU. And this is a bit at risk for the war taking place in Ukraine. And the fact of the matter is that different Baltic states, such as Latvia or Slovakia or Romania, have a common border with Ukraine. So the issue of integrity of the national authorities is today an issue. In addition to this, the foreign policies must support democracy. So that's really not an issue with respect to India, because you are a democracy. But you imagine that dealing with Vietnam or dealing with Singapore, that give rise to issues regarding human rights and democracy. Preserve peace. A few years ago, I was not mentioning the peace to my students, but no, I really spent time to stress that peace is a major objective pursued by the EU, but also to prevent conflicts and to strengthen international security. And I will come back to these issues later on. And also promote an internal system based upon good governance and a stronger multilateral cooperation that's somewhat eroded by the new US administration that does not believe into multilateralism. So one could put forward the idea that it's just mere political slogans, it's just mere ideas. To the contrary, for lawyers, these values, perhaps they're not directly invocable before courts, but they underpin the whole legal system. And so the foreign policies conducted by the EU with its member states must contribute to the achievements of these different objectives. There are more numerous objectives, but I don't have the time to explain every objective. So this is treaty law. This is a binding obligation upon the EU institutions that are called on to conduct this foreign policy. Next slide, please. So the scope of that policy is quite wide. It encompasses every policy topics regarding the relations the member states or the EU has with international organizations or foreign states. So there is actually no limit to the scope of that policy. However, there is a clear limit within the legal order of the EU, which is what belongs to trade is falling within the ambit of the common trade or the common commercial policy. So the common foreign and security policies deals with genuine foreign and security policies issues. It cannot encompass trade, because external trade is falling within the scope of another policy. And there is a clear dividing line. Next slide, please. So the question is how the EU decides or whether it's possible to decide something about the war taking place in Ukraine or the conflicts in Gaza. At the outset, it's the head of state and government that gather regularly in Brussels that are setting the overall picture. They're setting the political directions. This institution is establishing the priorities regarding the drought in Africa, regarding natural catastrophes, earthquakes, regarding the relationship with the USA. So it's a kind of 10-page, 12-page statements that are adopted after 2 days negotiations unanimously by the chief of states. But more importantly, given that the chief of state just can determine the main directions to follow, the Council of the Union, so the council that's composed of different configurations, among which a configuration on foreign affairs, will define and implement those priorities. So to speak, the European Council determined the rather vague priorities, and the ministers of Foreign Affairs, so 27 member states, Minister of Foreign Affairs, will gather in Brussels and will flesh out the priorities determined by the boss, by the chief of state. So it's really an issue of fleshing out in taking proper decisions regarding security, regarding defense. But again, that's the rule of unanimity that prevails. It's not a qualified majority that will apply to agriculture, to foreign trade, to energy, to the integration of the internal market. We immediately stressed the importance played by the European Parliament. It's still the same slide. The European Parliament is not an industrial player in foreign policies. The Parliament is informed or it's consulted on a few issues, but it does not play any role but for the budget. The foreign policy, of course, it's consuming a lot of money, as one can imagine. And there, the Parliament is adopting the budget with the Council of the Union. So the Parliament has to say through the budgetary means, but politically speaking, the European Parliament in this connection is a dwarf. And I will demonstrate in the course of my second lecture that the European Parliament is playing a key role with respect to the conclusion of trade deals with South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, or Singapore. The European Commission is playing a role. It's preparing the meeting with the Council, and there is a Directorate General, an administration within the Commission in Brussels that's dealing with the external relation. But more importantly is this High Representative or this European Foreign Minister, Foreign Affairs Minister, today Mrs. Callas. She's heading the Foreign Affairs Council on the one hand, but she is also Vice President of the European Commission. And that was one of the innovations of the 2009 Lisbon Treaty, is to have a person that's straddling on two institutions, the Council and the European Union, to make the link. And I will give further explanation. Next slide, please. So the High Representative, we will call for, as a matter of simplicity, the EU foreign ministers, is in charge of conducting, concretely speaking, the security and the defense policies. She will preside over the meetings where all the ministers of foreign affairs gather in Brussels, but she's also taking part every Wednesday in the Commission's meetings in Brussels, completely different institutions. This is the executive. So she's both in the political dimension, the global political dimension, but also she's in charge of the departments of the responsible for external action. And she's there to ensure the coherence and the effectiveness of the external action that encompasses development aid, trade, as we shall discuss, humanitarian aid, and crisis responses. And she is expressing the EU's positions in international organizations and conferences. So she's playing a kind of key role. And that function did not exist prior to the adoptions of the Lisbon Treaty. Next slide, please. So this is the former Prime Minister of Estonia, which is the Baltic countries, next to Russia. So they are actually really afraid to be invaded by the Red Army. And she has been appointed by the head of states to hold that very specific position, straddling the Council and the European Commission. And so she is to cooperate with the President of the European Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, and she has to cooperate, on the other hand, with the 27 Minister of Foreign Affairs. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So she's really heading the diplomacy. So, of course, unanimity is blocking. It's difficult to reach unanimous positions when each minister is defending its own national agenda. And I gave you the example of the absence of recognitions of Palestine as a state, or the absence of recognition of Kosovo as a state. However, the High Representative, so the Minister of Mrs. Callas, is often adopting statements on behalf of the Council of Ministers, gathering the foreign ministers. And I imagine that will be interesting for you. If one reads the European Union, so this is part of the foreign policies, but also the 27 member states within the realm of their own foreign policies, condemning the heinous terrorist attacks in Pahalgam, Jammu and Kashmir that took place on the 22nd April. And those responsible for the attack must be brought to justice. Every state, so you understand, in reading between the lines, what is it about, has the duty and the right lawfully to protect its citizens from acts of terror. So this is an extremely diplomatic style. So the provisions that Sébastien Facio will comment upon tomorrow are of a legal nature. This is genuine diplomacy. And the EU is taking seriously the issues, is monitoring with great concern, typically diplomatic style, the growing tensions in the regions. And if you read the second line of the last line of the second paragraph, it is vital that India and Pakistan also live up to their obligation under international law and take all measures possible to protect civilian life. The EU will work with all parties to desescalate the situation. But there is no roadmap, so it's just a statement. There is internally a roadmap, but this roadmap is unknown. One cannot have access to this roadmap. But the message is clear, is the promotion of peace. Everything has to be done to implement correctly international law and to achieve the desescalations and to avoid a conflict. Of interest is the additional comment is that third countries, some of which might become member states in the 10 coming years, such as Albania and Iceland and Moldova, it's a possibility, are supporting this statement. So this statement is embraced more than the 27 national visions. It's supported by also third countries from Europe. So this is an example of different policies falling short of reaching traditional legal standards. Next slide, please. The Foreign Minister, Mrs. Callas, is also supported by European External Action Service. So this is a diplomatic service. The European Union has embassies a bit all over, from Rio de Janeiro to Canberra to New Delhi. So besides the French embassy or the German embassy or the Belgian embassy in New Delhi, there is also a kind of EU embassy in New Delhi. And so this diplomatic service that's composed of national diplomats, of internal civil servants, is assisting, is supporting the High Representative in preparing and conducting this foreign policy. Next slide, please. Of course, member states have a say because the Mrs. Callas can make such statement provided that all the member states agreed upon the statement. So she's just the spokespersons of the Council of Ministers, of Foreign Ministers. But given the significant technicalities of many files, there are different committees based in Brussels that are actually preparing the meetings of the foreign affairs ministers. And that's a political and security committee, the committee for civilian aspects of crisis management, that has been active when Pakistan was hit by floodings, and military committee. That's rather new because for the 3 years conflict in Ukraine, there has been an urge to develop a common defense policy at EU level. Next slide, please. So the political and security committee is so far the most important one. It's composed of the ambassadors, not the bilateral ambassadors to Belgium, but the EU's ambassadors. So each country, each member state of the EU has its own ambassadors with diplomats in Brussels, in addition to the bilateral embassies. And so this committee is monitoring the internal situation. That's quite chaotic today. It's preparing the opinion to the Council of Ministers. So the consensus is taking place at the first stage at the level of the committee. Because the ministers, they come to Brussels maybe just for a few hours or for half a day. So they don't have 3 days to reach the consensus. So their ambassadors have to prepare the floor. They have to reach a consensus, and the consensus will then be endorsed by the 27 ministers of foreign affairs. And of course, they will also provide guidance to the military committee, and they ensure the political control and strategic directions of crisis management operations. So the EU is spending a lot of money on crisis management, in particular with respect to floodings, earthquakes, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. This is the committee for civil aspects of crisis management. It's not the ambassadors, but representatives that usually are working for the national embassies. And so they will make the recommendations regarding the action the Commission is going to carry out to bring aid, to bring medications, to bring a fireman in order to solve a crisis. Next slide, please. So besides, and that's really something new, and the European academic world is starting to paying heed to the common security and defense policy. There are fewer provisions in treaty law dealing with that defense policy, because at the outset it was in a black box. Nobody really believed in it. But for the position taken by the President of the United States of America, the Europeans are fearing to be left alone when it comes to defense. And as you're aware, they've been investing far less in defense spending than the United States of America did for these last 60 or 70 years. And so defense is beginning for these last 3 years to play a major role in the meetings in Brussels for the sheer absence, because the defense has been assumed so far by the NATO, that's also based in Brussels. Next slide, please. And so the defense policy is an integral part of the foreign policy, but it's a progressive framing, because at the starting point, there's been nearly nothing. Of importance is to mention the mutual defense clause that's similar to the clause in the NATO treaty that whenever a member state will be victim of an armed aggression from a third party, the other member states must provide him with aid and assistance. Let's not mention military aid. And so that's the case raised by Poland and by Estonia that are on the border of Belarus and Russia, that are fearing to face interference with hostile Russian forces. And so that defense clause has never been applied because no member state so far has been attacked by a third country. The defense policies has been empowering the institutions to conduct military operations to fight the Houthis, for instance, in the Red Sea, to fight the Muslim extremists in Cabo Delgado, north of Mozambique, still now gaining new forces, to intervene in Somalia, to intervene in Mali against the different extreme Muslim groups. But besides also military operations on the one hand that need to be supported by civilian missions in Sahel, Mali, in Sahel, Niger, or in Ukraine. It's always a complex combinations of different approach. The military operations are there to stabilize the country that's requesting the support of the EU. But the EU is strong because it has a lot of financial means, and it can support election. It can enhance the country's stabilities in deploying police force, for instance. So there is no shortage of illustrations of the reality of the security and the defense policy. Next slide, please. Lately, what has been in the center of the chess game has been the European Peace Facility, with actually a peace facility supporting the effort of the Ukrainian troops fighting against the Red Army. And so the European Peace Facility is streamlining the EU budget. So it's a EU financing instruments that's delivering military aid to Ukraine. But besides, it's also funding the deployment of EU military missions abroad. So there is no military missions, EU military missions in Ukraine. There are no French troops or German troops in Ukraine. So far, it's just diplomatic support, policy support, but also, most importantly, financial support through the European Peace Facility. It's really, I think the amount is somewhat 18 billion euros for this year. So it's really significant sums of money that can have a leverage in a conflict like the one we know on the eastern side of Europe. Next slide, please. Yes.
It's true, sir.
So this is really the foreign policy in a nutshell. As a matter of course, issues are much more complicated, but my take-home message, this is really genuine intergovernmentalism, but with very specific structures that are rather new, that were created thanks to the Treaty of Lisbon that was mentioned by your colleagues at the outset of the program. So the EU, the Lisbon Treaty has been somewhat a game changer in reshaping the institutions, and the fact to have an EU Minister of Foreign Affairs besides the 27 Minister of Foreign Affairs is enhancing, so to speak, the credibility of the EU as a global actor. And that's another take-home message. It's important to be strong and to be robust when it comes to trade in goods, in services, in a globalized economy. But given the array of crises across Africa, across the Middle East, the EU has to position itself as a key leader when it comes to security, internal security, and internal defense. These are my take-home messages. But I propose to answer the questions because next I will shift into the trade policy, which is completely apart. That's really the nexus of the reasoning is that this two-pronged approach with security, diplomacy, defense on the one hand, that's not harmonized, that's not leading to harmonization, whereas when it comes to trade issues, the integration is much more robust. Any questions? Sébastien, do you wish to ask?
Yeah, maybe. So I mean, I thought it was very, very interesting and very important to highlight these two-prong, I mean, these two limbs of the using external action, and maybe if you could, like the EU is sometimes criticized. So you mentioned different conflicts, no? But the EU is sometimes criticized for not acting, for instance, or not doing much on the what is happening in Gaza. Could you differentiate that from based on the institutional framework and the what you just explained, differentiate that from the action with the war in Ukraine, and why with Ukraine there is so much that is being done with the peace facility and the financial aid to Ukraine, whereas it appears and the EU is sometimes criticized for not acting and not doing much related to Israel.
Yeah, that's really. Maybe I will comment a bit the big pictures to the Indian students. But when I was taking part in my meeting in the University of Bremen, it was the building of the law faculties next to the cathedral, and there was a group of German Jewish with Israeli flags on the one hand, but surrounded by a handful of policemen, and on the other hand, there were Palestinians with the Palestinian flags. And I was contemplating the two groups, and I was realizing that the conflicts taking place in Gaza and partially in Cisjordania is exporting itself to Europe. And of course, this is a serious concern. For instance, in my country, in Belgium, we have a significant population of persons of Moroccan descent because there was a trade agreement concluded in 1962 between the Kingdom of Belgium and the Kingdom of Morocco to import cheap labor force from Morocco, and the person stayed on in Belgium. And many of my students, my third-year students, are girls who still have the American citizenship. They can combine both citizenship. So it means that there are internal conflicts across Europe, in particular countries like Belgium, like France, the Netherlands, where there are significant Muslim populations. Some part of societies supporting the Palestinians, whereas the German political establishment is supporting still somewhat the state of Israel, is less more critical toward Palestine, but it is highly complex. So it means that many criticisms accuse the EU of double standards. Say, on the one hand, we are supporting politically, diplomatically, financially the war effort of the Ukrainian authorities, whereas we have somewhat a much more timid, shy approach when it comes to the conflict between Sahel, the Israeli army, and the Hezbollah in South Lebanon, or between Sahel and the Hamas in Gaza. Of course, what matters are numbers. The EU is the main donor when it comes to foreign aid, and big parts of the medical education and facilities in Gaza, which have been bombed, actually have been paid by the EU budget. So it means that the European taxpayers, such as Sébastien Facio and myself, we have been paying for facilities that have been bombed in these conflicts. So we've been somewhat as taxpayers on the losing side, because we do contribute as citizens to the EU budget. So the EU, thanks to the foreign aid, is playing a role in the region. But when it comes to diplomacy, we are really at the hardcore of my lecture, is that the states must be unanimous in condemning this military action. What I did in the course of my lectures on EU law was really week by week, I was commenting upon all the decisions taken by the ministers of foreign affairs. So there's been condemnations of a number of military actions, in particular the ones hitting children or women or medical care. I looked at truly in the course of September, October, November, and trying to explain to my students, these are the reality of the EU diplomacy. So, but so far there is no missions. So what could happen actually is that in case there is a genuine truce between Israel and the authority governing Gaza, Hamas, I imagine that the EU diplomacy will propose a peace mission. The EU has the experience in conducting peace missions in conflictual areas, and the budget is there, and that's really of interest for the EU that peace is reestablished in the region, because we have a member state that's very close to the conflict, which is Cyprus.
Thanks a lot. I don't know if there are any other questions.
I'd have a question. I don't know if the professor. Yes. Hello, my name is Federico. I'm a student at the University of Palermo, Italy. I would just like to ask, Professor, according to you, how credible is EU diplomacy in the eyes of foreign states when member states often express divergent views? Should the EU foreign policy be seen as a complementary to national policies, or has it in some cases been overshadowed or even undermined by the individual foreign policies of member states?
It seems to me that the two answers are correct. The Lisbon Treaty is really breaking new grounds. There was no clarity regarding the role of the European Council. There was no real functions for high representative of the foreign policy. So according to many European scholars, the Lisbon Treaty has been framing the respective role. So On the positive side, yes. So the EU is enabled to speak with one voice through Mrs. Callas. So it's a step forward. Foreign affairs is a minefield because I imagine Italian the position of your government today differs from the position taken on many topics from the Belgian government, which is center right, but your government is much more on the right than my own government. So the progress has been achieved. The question is whether the glass is half empty or half full. For many observers, the glass is unfortunately half empty. Because the rule of unanimity prevails, and that's really hindering the possibility to adopt extremely clear decisions. So the area is more is more subject to political science, to lawyers. When I looked at all the decisions endorsed by the Council of Foreign Affairs, it's genuine diplomatic style. It's falling short of any legal style as we have in investment law or in trade law. But this is a reality, and the risk is that it's the rivalry between the divas. That must sound music to your ears. And of course, Minister of Foreign Affairs, they have a very strong ego, and they might compete in trying to put forward the views. So far, it's, I imagine, insufficient, given the level of crisis we do face. But nevertheless, Europe is successful thanks to crisis. So the crisis taking place in Ukraine is also an opportunity to build upon this European of defense. So when the Treaty of Lisbon was hammered out, nobody believed in the future of European defense. And 3 years ago, everything changed.
Thank you for your answer.
Any other questions?
There's another question.
Professor, I have a question. On the statement by the High Representative on 8th May on the Pahalgam attack in India, the last line named a few countries, and the statement said they align themselves with this statement. So does that mean they don't fully agree with this statement, or they agree fully with this statement, and the rest of the countries that are not named in the statement are they not aligning themselves with the statement of the High Representative?
When I read this, I was quite surprised because I never saw the statements exposed by the 27 ministers of foreign affairs, but channeled through Mrs. Callas. I never saw any mentions of third countries supporting such statements. So it seems to me that's maybe a new practice. And why such a practice? Perhaps on the account that among the different member states listed, several of them do apply to become a member. That has been the case of Serbia, that has been strongly the case of Ukraine, of northern Kosovo. So many third countries are eager to become member states. And so maybe it's a maneuver through which the EU is trying to embark into its diplomacy at third countries. Of course, when it's stronger, when the club is gathering 35 members instead of 27 members. So numbers do matter in diplomacy. it seems to me that the third states are supporting fully the statement. But again, what's going on behind the scene? I'm unable to answer your questions. So I imagine that the French embassy, the German embassy in Islamabad, in New Delhi, have been very active these last weeks. The EU missions must also have been very active, but this is not recorded. This is diplomacy, so it's not subject to access to information. So if journalists want to get the roadmap, their request for access to information will be dismissed by the Council of Ministers or by the European Commission. And that's subject to litigation. There are many ongoing litigations to access this kind of information. So we don't know. I didn't read, I'm reading different foreign newspapers. I didn't had the chance to see any analysis, update analysis regarding the ways in which the different diplomatic service try to support the correct implementation of international law in this file.
Thank you.
Okay, but I propose then that I move directly to the second lecture on the trade issues, which will be a bit more technically complex. Mr. Sayed, could you be kind enough to
Yes, sir.
set out the second slide?
Yes, sure, sir. Can you see my slide, sir?
Yes, I think it's possible to increase. Yeah, like this. Yes, so it's mostly I focus mostly on the common commercial policy, but I wanted also to mention development aid, which is communitarized policy. So that's really the second limb. But the second limb is much broader than the trade issues because it encompasses also development aid. So I will start with development aid, and then the focus will be placed on the common commercial policies, the decision-making process, because tomorrow I will contemplate a few legal instruments dealing with investment. Second slide, please. Well, as I mentioned, the EU is the main actor at global level when it comes to humanitarian aid or to development cooperation. So the budgets are quite significant. And of course, the 27 member states do conduct their own development aid policy. So if you are adding the German, the French, the Italian budgets to the EU budgets, there is indeed much leverage. So the development cooperation policy, it's a communitarized policy. So it's part of the 50 policies conducted by the EU. So there is a title on cooperation, development cooperation. And as a matter of law, this policy must be conducted within the framework of the principles, the values, the objectives of the EU external actions. And that's to promote peace, to promote sustainable development, and to enhance the key values underpinning the EU, be it dignity, be it fundamental rights, be it freedom, be it the rule of law. Nevertheless, the primary objective of that policy is United Nations objective, which is the eradication of poverty. The measures, in contrast to the genuine external policies approach that I just explained, these measures are decided by the European Parliament on the one hand and the Council of the Union, gathering the ministers in charge of development cooperation. And so the two branches of the legislative powers will reach a deal, will to decide to, as a matter of budget, to support Mali or to Congo or to Chad as a matter of development. Besides, there is also the issue of humanitarian aid. So as you are aware that our planet is facing more and more significant difficulties with the rising of temperatures and the rising of the sea. I don't know whether you're aware that a village in Switzerland, in Valais, disappeared. It was swallowed a bit, like you have this in northern India, in the Himalayas. A glacier collapsed, and the village disappeared. It was 4 or 5 days ago. So more and more the EU is called on to intervene, to provide ad hoc assistance and relief for people in third countries, usually in rather poor countries, who are victims of natural disasters. So be it earthquakes, be it the collapse of a glacier, or hurricanes. So the EU is also playing an important role in that respect. But as I explained, besides the police missions, besides the military missions in countries such as Burkina Faso and Mali, there was also the humanitarian aid agency of the EU supporting our program. And so again, this is communitarized policy, so it's the Parliament and the Council of the Union deciding the legislation. Next slide, please. What's important for the EU is also to conclude agreements. And I will spend a bit of time tomorrow on trade agreements. But besides trade agreements, there are more global agreements, which are called association agreements. So the EU has concluded different association agreements with countries in the Caucasus, with Turkey, but it has also concluded an agreement with former colonies in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Asia. And this agreement is known as the EU-OSCPS partnership agreement. And so if one looks at the different priority areas of the Samoa agreement, it's much more than trade in services or in capitals or in goods, because it encompasses democracies and human rights, key values underpinning the EU legal order, sustainable economic growth and development, climate change, human and social developments, peace and security, migration and mobility. So the policy agenda is extremely ambitious. Next slide, please. And in addition, this agreement has been concluded by 79 developing countries. So it's concluded with the 27 member states, the EU, and these countries are mostly from Africa and the Caribs and the Pacifics. And so given that my program deals with the Indo-Pacific region, it seems to me that it was important to mention, and the Maldives are not far away from the Indian subcontinent. So India is not party to that agreement. It's mostly developing countries, and the Samoa agreement really contemplates a more global vision than the recent trade agreement that the EU has been concluding with Vietnam or Singapore. In addition, and what's quite remarkable from an intra-legal perspective is this agreement is flanked by an institutional framework. So the agreement has been establishing a council of ministers where the EU ministers will gather with the ministers of the 79 developing countries, parties to the agreement. There is also a committee of ambassadors, and as a matter of trade, a ministerial trade committee. In addition, what matters for these former colonies is the financial assistance, and there is a contractualized financial assistance. And so this partnership agreement can be looked at as an umbrella convention, an umbrella agreement, because it has been leading to the negotiations and the conclusions of a flurry of specific economic partnership agreements, which are mostly bilateral agreements. And what's remarkable, these agreements contemplate asymmetry of trade concessions. So today, as you're aware, the EU is negotiating with the US administration's tariffs. So the new US administration's been placing a lot of pressure upon the EU custom unions in raising unilaterally their tariffs on the import of German cars or French wine or French cheese, but without any negotiations. Here, the EU is ready to give greater concessions to developing countries such as Chad in Africa, or as Haiti or Jamaica in the Caribs. So this is really, I want to mention this to stress the difference between the genuine economic nature of the trade agreements that are so important to the EU now, and these partnership agreements that are called association agreements. Next slide. And that's the legal basis to adopt, to conclude this agreement. So it's a very short provisions in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. It reads as follows: the Union may conclude with one or more third countries, here the Samoa agreement is with 79 countries, an agreement establishing an association involving reciprocal rights and obligations, common action, and special procedure. So it's a mandate to do a bit everything from policy dialogue to trade issues. And now lately I've been working somewhat on association agreements with the South American countries, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, and Brazil. It's been nearly 30 years of negotiation between the four countries and the EU. And at the outset, it was supposed to be an association agreement alike the Samoa agreement. But lately, for industrial reasons, the European Commission is trying to obtain the conclusion of a genuine trade agreement to avoid the ratification by member states. So I'm trying to keep abreast with these developments. I'm invited to hold speech on the subject matter soon in Latin America. Next slide, please. And then I come to this, to what's really important in this lecture, because the aim is to raise the awareness about the importance of EU law in a globalized context for Indian lawyers. And one of the policy that Sébastien Facio mentions when he gave you the list, the different categories of competence, was the common commercial policy. It was deemed to be an exclusive competence, you know? So it's exclusive. So the member states have no say. It's the EU institutions deciding, and the conduct of that policy is depriving the member states of their room for maneuver. In sharp contrast, in the previous lectures, I stressed that Mrs. Callas has to call constantly the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Paris, in Berlin, in Stockholm, in Copenhagen, to try to reach a consensus. Here it's the EU institutions deciding. And so the trade policy or common commercial policy mostly derives from the WTO framework, which so far has been governing the multilateral trading system so far, because since March 2025, everything has been called into question. This policy is somewhat the interface between the internal market. So the internal market has been a success story of the EU. The EU embarked upon the creation of a common market in 1958 after the adoption of the Rome Treaty. So you remember the first picture of the signature of the Rome Treaty in 1957. And so that led to the creation of the common market. And the common market became the internal market. Internal market is a free movement of goods, free movement of persons, of capitals, of services between the 27 member states, and the possibility for mother companies to establish daughter companies in the other countries without having to obtain a particular license, a particular authorization. And so this internal market has really been leading to the boosting the economic growth in Europe. Both of us are Belgian citizens, so Belgium is deemed to be one of the countries on the planet which is the most active in this globalized economy, as our economy is really dependent upon the trading activities with France, Germany, the Netherlands. We are really in the center of Europe, at the crossroad of Europe, and our companies do import, do export. Most of the products I consume here in Brussels are products from Italy, from Greece, from France, and not Belgian products. So it means that this internal market is a reality, and the internal market is extremely, how to say, of interest for Indian companies, for Chinese companies. They want to invest in Europe because the fact of having daughter companies in Europe allows them to cross easily the borders. But what matters is to have the connection between the internal market and the external trade. Because we do import the oil, the gas, the critical materials, the timber from other continents. So there must be a nexus between the globalized internal economy of Europe and the globalized trade. And so the consolidation of this internal market has been strengthening the EU's position as a pole of attraction, but also as a pole of influence. And that's what we'll discuss in the 2 coming days for trade negotiations, either multilateral or bilateral. And so we are here really at the nexus, in the nexus of the industrial actions and trade activities. Of course, although the CCP, Common Commercial Policy, aims at boosting economic activities, is nevertheless embedded in this more general framework for external action. General action, external actions that must promote the most fundamental values, be it freedom, dignity, but also security, independence of the countries, their territorial integrity, democracy, the rule of law, peace. And so that means that although it's a policy apart, it's a policy in its own right, such as the foreign or the defense policy, but nevertheless, all these policies are subject to the key principles, the key objectives, the key values enshrined in Article 2 and Article 21 of the Treaty of European Union. And as a matter of legal reasoning, this is of utmost importance, is that one cannot think in clinical isolations. So many civil servants dealing with trade will express the view that the business of business is to make business. And the aim of a trading policy is to boost trade without any consideration for peace or human rights or the rule of law. But from a genuine constitutional perspective, this is a wrong statement, because what matters in a constitutional order is the prevalence of the key values and the key general principles. And so, like every other policies, the common commercial policies must abide by this broader constitutional vision. And of course, that can be the source of conflicts. Let's take the case of the trade agreement concluded between the EU and Vietnam. The European labor federations were not so enthusiastic about that agreement. For which reason? On the account that Vietnam, although it's a communist country, has not been concluding many of the defense and so how can one reconcile the trading activities between the EU and Vietnam, whereas Vietnam is unable to catch up with the international labor law? So that's a conflict, but we can come back to this. Of course, the devil lies in the detail, and the common commercial policy is a policy entailing measures that are deemed to be internal to protect the European Union from dumping or from foreign subsidies or from foreign investments that can hinder the security, but also a number of external measures and the conclusions of tariff and trade agreements, the commercial aspect of intellectual property rights, and the conclusions of treaties on investment. So the CCP is reckoning upon internal as well as external measures. And now I will provide you a few illustrations of these two limbs, and I will stress as a matter of law the difference regarding the decision-making process. Next slide, please. But first, it's the dividing line between the common commercial policy and the internal market policy. So the internal market policy is a policy apart, because the internal market is to flesh out the key free movements, the key movement freedoms of capital, of goods, of establishments, and so on and so forth. And so the internal market is an internal issue. It's the trading regarding between German and Belgium, for instance. So when it comes to investments, the internal market is trying to lay down specific rules regarding interstate investment. So it's an investment, a Belgian investment in Germany, or a Belgian or German investment in Belgium. And that's part of the internal market. The same, the import of German goods in Belgium or the import of German services in Belgium, that's part of the internal market. But let's come to the opposite situations. Greece has a number of Chinese investments since 2008, since the financial crisis. And a Chinese investment in Germany or in Greece is not part of the internal market because China is not part of the EU. It's subject to the rules of the common commercial policies. So the common commercial policy encompasses the foreign direct investment issues. And so that means that regarding litigation, the specific investment litigations instruments with this ISDS can work at the global level. So the EU can accept that member states such as Germany has a specific ISDS clause with a third country. However, when it comes to litigation taking place between German investors in Belgium and the Belgian authorities, there is no room for maneuver, there is no place for ISDS. The domestic courts, the Belgian courts or the German courts, are called on to adjudicate the dispute between the German investors and the Belgian authorities. So there is clearly a dividing line between the internal market and the common commercial policy. Next slide, please. And so again, here, as Sébastien Fassot stressed, everything is about conferral of powers, and the legislative instrument can be enacted provided that there is a specific competence. And the competence for the establishment and the functioning of the internal markets is laid related to the free circulations of goods, capitals, and services between the 27 countries. Whereas the CCP criteria to determine when the CCP will apply, because it's another procedure, is that the EU actions relates to internal trade, meaning trade with non-member countries such as India, in that it is essentially intended to promote or to facilitate or to govern trade and has direct and immediate effects on trade activities. So that's the case law dividing line between the two policies. Next slide, please. But of course, there are limits to the common commercial policies. I will give you some illustration. So the powers are conferred to the institutions, and powers have been conferred regarding agriculture, regarding fisheries, regarding education, regarding energy, regarding environment, regarding foreign trade, and so on and so forth. And the legislative instrument can be enacted in as much as there is a specific powers. So a regulation on artificial intelligence is related to the internal market, and so it must be based upon Article 114 that grants the powers to the EU institution to adopt regulations and directives in this field. Regulations on agricultural products must be part of the agricultural policy. It cannot be part of the health policy, or it cannot be part of the transport policy. That one makes sense. And from a legal point of view, it's It's impossible. But what matters here from a legal point of view, that's a bit difficult for my students to understand. The common commercial policy is exclusive competence. So the EU has the last word. Whereas the other policies I mentioned, transport, environment, health, they are deemed to be shared competence. So it means that the member states have more leeway, have more room for maneuver. And often legislative instruments enacted within the realm of other policies might have trade impact, external trade impacts. And that will be the case of CBAM that was mentioned by the first speaker, or the EUDR regulations or deforestation-free product regulations. That has huge consequence on import of cocoa, of coffee, of soybean, of rubber. But this is not a CCP measure, this is an environmental measure. Next slide, please. So, for instance, within the CCP, the Council and Parliaments will enact regulations on anti-dumping measures, will have been enacting a regulation that I will comment upon tomorrow on filtering the investment, so surveying whether a Chinese investment is not likely to undermine the defense policy. But and there I gave you other examples. So Indian companies might face difficulties in exporting some tea to the EU because the tea might have some residues of chemical substance, because some pesticides that are prohibited in Europe might still be marketed in India. I don't know. I don't have the checklist, but let's imagine that there are differences. Then the product cannot be imported. And that's food safety regulation. That's part of the internal market. It can be an obstacle in importing goods, but that obstacle under GATT agreement is valid under Article 20 of the GATT agreement because it relates to safety of animals and human health. So the derogation is as admissible, is as much is proportionate. But the two other regulations I will discuss on Wednesday is the deforestation-free products regulation that encompass soya beans and timber and the like. This is a genuine environmental measure. So this is not part of the CCP. So it's the ministers for environment that have been adapting this regulation, not the ministers in charge of foreign trade. The same for the CBAM regulations that was mentioned earlier today, and I will also come back to these issues on Wednesday. This is a genuine environmental measure, although it will impact the import of cement, of nickel, of electricity, of iron in Europe, in placing a carbon price on these imports. So what really matters to practitioners in Europe is to draw the dividing lines between the different categories of competence, because each policy entails specific legal basis, specific criteria, specific conditions, and will have an impact upon the institutional arrangement. Next slide, please. Now I will try to explain this. So this is a CBAM. So I will come back to this. You clearly see this is slides from the European Commission, so from national agencies. It has a significant, it will have a significant impact upon imports of cement from India, for instance. Next slide, please. Another critical dividing line is the one with the foreign policy. So there's been different agreements encompassing the fight against terrorism or the fight against proliferation of weapons. And so some member states took the view that these agreements were part of the foreign policies. So it was to promote peace in fighting against terrorism. It was to promote security. So genuinely, it was part of the foreign policy. But that has huge institutional consequence because each minister has the possibility to veto the proposal for the sake that's unanimity. But the European Commission has been counter-arguing with other member states, but these agreements were part to broader pictures that was not only about terrorism or weapons, it was also economic cooperation, and then it was part of development aid. And development aid, as I expressed earlier, it's a shared policy. It's a communitarized policy. It means that the parliament is placed upon equal footing with the Council of Ministers. Whereas under the CFSP, the foreign policy, the parliament is nearly ignored. So I stress that's the foreign ministers that just sit in Brussels and decide what must be done with the internal crisis or the regional crisis. And the Court of Justice has been favoring development aid to the detriment of the common foreign policies. So these issues of frontiers between the policies is, of course, giving rise to disputes between the member states and the EU or between the EU institutions, because each specific policy entails an array of specific conditions, and it really matters to determine what's the relevant policy. Next slide, please. So the CCP regulatory approach is based upon autonomous measures. So the idea is to have uniform principles regarding custom duties. So we need just to have the same tariff for the Indian goods, for the Nigerian goods, for the Bolivian goods, for the USA goods or services. There is a system of generalized preference, and there are also trade defense measures. So these are autonomous EU measures. Usually regulations are adopted in that connection. But besides, there is the issue of concluding with treaties a trade agreement. And the trade agreement will place the focus upon the reductions of tariffs. So, of course, what's being discussed in Brussels and New Delhi between the diplomats of the EU and the Indian diplomats is to reduce for different categories of goods the tariffs in order to boost trade activities between the EU and India, because economists have been demonstrating that in reducing the tariffs, that's boosting growth. This is an internal agreement. This is internal public law, so to speak. Whereas the autonomous measures, they are genuinely EU measures enacted by the EU lawmaker. And as I explained, Sébastien Facio explained extremely clearly earlier today, these measures are enacted by both the European Parliament, 720 MPs, and the 27 ministers. So I will give you some illustrations regarding autonomous measures, and I will explain you the, roughly speaking, the internal agreement institutional issues. Next slide, please. So it's really the two-pronged approach. Next, please. So when it comes to the enactment of the regulations on anti-dumping, the European Commission, the executive, is proposing to the lawmaker, so the Parliament and the Council of Ministers, the proposal for a regulation. And then it enters to this ordinary legislative procedure and co-decisions, and the Council of Ministers, not the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but the trade ministers will come to Brussels, gather, and take a position regarding the proposal made by the Commission. And likewise, the European Parliament will decide on its own, will take positions regarding the proposal of the Commission. And of course, their point of view might differ because there are two sources of legitimacy. They might disagree, and they will have to reach a consensus because the regulation can be adopted provided that the true branch of the lawmaker is reaching an agreement. And when the regulation has been adopted, then the European Commissions will be in charge of adopting the implementing measures, and the European Commission will have to look at the member states to assess whether the member states do implement correctly the regulation. The regulation is directly applicable, whether the offenses will be prosecuted at national level, whether the fines will be established, and so on and so forth. So this is really the very classical communitarian method that applies to the internal CCP legislative instruments. And that's really utterly opposed to the foreign policy schemes or defense schemes I just explained. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the 2016 regulations on anti-dumping measures. That's quite important because you know that the labor force in Europe is much more costly than in the third countries. So the EU is somewhat at a disadvantage, and some countries tend to support the exporters in subsidizing them. So it means that their products are exported to the EU at a price which is below the normal value. And so a price on the counting is not itself illegal. Anti-dumping may be imposed whether there is dumping by the producers in the third countries, whether the European industry will suffer material injury, and when there is a causal link between the dumping and the injury, but last and not least, whether the measure in place is not running against the European interest. So these regulations entails highly procedural requirements given the due process right of interest parties. So the foreign companies are endowed with the right of defense. They must be heard by the commissions that will take the measures. So they come to Brussels with their attorneys, and they will submit briefs. They will have to be heard. The Commission will have to state the reasons, explaining the reason for which it applies the anti-dumping measures on Chinese electric cars, on Vietnamese shoes, on Korean steel. So the Commission must, of course, demonstrate that these four conditions are met. And in case the foreign companies subject to anti-dumping measures disagree with the methodology applied by the Commission, according to the rule of law, the foreign companies is impacted by the measures and has the right to stand before the General Court of the Court of Justice in Luxembourg and will lodge a claim with a view to obtain the nullification of the Commission measures. So one clearly understands this is a legislative instrument that has been adopted by the Parliament and the Council that lays down the conditions, that lays down the procedures, and the Commission as an executive, as a government, is empowered to enact decisions or regulations applying these standards to foreign imports. And of course, these measures is impacting trade, is impacting the right of the foreign companies, and can be subject to litigation And there are a number of cases that are decided every month on anti-dumping measures in Luxembourg by the General Court of the EU. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I will come back to this issue tomorrow. Yeah, so the one of the most significant measures that has been enacted in the field of anti-dumping is the one on the import of electric cars from China. So the EU is trying to achieve climate neutrality by 2050, in 25 years from now, and that entails a lot, many modifications of internal market rules regarding the placing on market of cars. So the electric cars will replace the fuel-powered engines. And the Chinese companies have an advantage because they've been developing electric cars faster than the European companies. But in addition, apparently, the People's Republic of China has been really supporting financially the Chinese undertakings producing and exporting electric cars. And after fairly long investigations, the Commission has been publishing, I think, 800 pages staff working documents demonstrating that there were significant market distortions given the involvement of the People's Republic of China into the price structure of the electric cars. And thanks to the powers conferred upon it by the legislative instruments, the Commission has been placing anti-dumping rights on the import of Chinese cars. So the Chinese cars are more expensive than they were a few months ago because the foreign companies, the Chinese companies, has to pay to the European Commission the anti-dumping rights, and the anti-dumping rights is trying to place upon equal footing the Italian electric car or the German electric cars with the Chinese electric car. So we are really here at the heart of the common commercial policy. So it's nothing to do with the internal market, because internal market is import-export of goods between Belgium and Germany, and that stops there. Here it's Chinese investment or Chinese interference in the price structures of a product that's import in the internal market. Next slide, please. Another issue I will address is the control of foreign subsidies. So the internal market is extremely attractive. So for instance, many Chinese companies have been purchasing harbors in Greece around 2009, 2010, because Greece was bordering on bankruptcy, so there were a lot of opportunities. And the matter is to develop scrutiny and there are different instruments scrutinizing the foreign investment, but also scrutinizing the whether the foreign states has been subsidizing the productions of the foreign goods. And that led to the enactment of this legislative instrument, these foreign subsidies regulations. And so it's different from anti-dumping. It really addresses the distortions of competition because the foreign state is really interfering, is granting public aid, public support, public financial support to foreign companies, and that makes these foreign companies much more competitive, for instance, in obtaining public procurement contracts. So that's an illustration. So tomorrow I will clarify all these different legislative instruments that can apply to Indian business, for instance. Next slide, please. But then I come to the conclusions of internal agreements. So the Court of Justice, in its opinion of 1975, recalled that the community or the union is empowered person to the powers which it possesses, not only to adopt internal rules, such as the ones I explained, but also to conclude intra-law agreements with third countries. So clearly, we see that there is an interaction between the custom policy developed by the custom unions at EU level with the external, the trade agreements. So the trade agreements might have an impact upon the custom union because the trade agreements will aim at reducing the tariffs. And of course, if in case there is such an agreement between the EU and South Korea, that should lead to the modification of the internal measures, the EU custom codes, that should lead to lower tariffs for importing South Korean technology or South Korean cars, which has been the case. Next slide, please. And so these are of importance is the second paragraph of Article 216. So these agreements, when they're concluded, according to the competences conferred by the treaties, they are binding upon the EU institutions, but also on its member states. And here, in particular, this is exclusive competence. So when the agreement, a trade agreement has been concluded with Vietnam, Singapore, and New Zealand, for instance, Belgium is bound by the agreement that has been concluded by the EU lawmaker. Belgium has never been a party to these trade agreements. But in sharp contrast, the association agreement, the summer agreement I just explained at the beginning of the lectures, that has been concluded by the EU and 79 countries, developing countries. It has also been concluded by France, by Germany, by Poland, by Czechia, by Slovakia, by Ireland, by Spain, by Malta, and so on and so forth. So this is really a mixed agreement because the member states have also parties because it's an association agreement. It's so broad. Whereas, you know, in the field, in the realm of the common commercial policy, everything unfolds around trade, and foreign trade is an exclusive competence. An exclusive competence means that there is no say for the member states. And that's really a huge, significant conflictual area. Next slide, please. And so that's the procedure, specific procedure for the conclusions of this agreement. So the Commission makes the recommendation to the ministers in charge of trade, of foreign trade. The Council will authorize the Commission to open the negotiations. So a few years ago, the Commission gave the green light to the Commission to open negotiations with New Zealand and Australia. The negotiations with Australia failed. There were too many stumbling blocks when it came to beef. However, the negotiations with New Zealand, in spite of the sheep, of the muttons, they were successful. And so that led to the conclusions of the New Zealand-EU Free Trade Treaty because the two parties were agreed upon the agreement. But of course, the member states are always afraid that the Commission will be too opportunistic, that the Commission won't care about the sensitiveness of the member states. So that's the issue with the Mercosur. So I mentioned Mercosur, this is Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil. They want to export more beef to the EU because they want to export more soybean to the EU. So far, there are quotas for the beef export from Brazil or from Paraguay. The Germans are very much interested in concluding these treaties because they want to export more Mercedes and Volkswagen to Brazil, a big market, an expanding market. So of course, you know everything about it's about concessions. But the French are very afraid of that Mercosur agreement. Why are the French afraid? They are afraid for the Brazilian or the Uruguayan or the Paraguayan beef that will be much cheaper than the beef, than the cattle in France. So, you know, Germany can be on the winning side with the Mercosur agreement, whereas the French and the Belgian might be on the losing side. And how do you compensate? How do you succeed in achieving an agreement? And for that reason, the negotiations must take place so they are conducted by the commissions. And so there will be meetings in Brussels, there will be meetings in Buenos Aires, in Rio de Janeiro, and there will be the state committees, the committee with the national civil servant, they will look at the work of the commission. And if they disagree with the ways in which the commission negotiates, if they believe that the commission is giving too many concessions, they will say, that's orange light, this won't be green light. We are not going to give the agreement to sign the draft treaty and to conclude the treaties, because it's the council that's concluding the treaty at a qualified majority, not at unanimity. So the commission is just a negotiator. But when it comes to a 1,200 pages agreement, you know, the negotiator is in a relatively comfortable position because it really determines the scope of the agreement. Next slide, please. So here I have been trying to summarize. So the commission is the starting point. It's proposing to the ministers to negotiate an agreement with India, and besides the negotiations with Thailand and with Indonesia. And then the Council of Ministers give the green light, the mandate to the negotiation. They are looking at the ways in which the Commission negotiates. And when the agreement has been, the negotiations are over, they will sign, that's the ministers will sign, or they will give the delegation to the Commission to sign the agreement, and they will conclude. But this is not a legislative instrument. This is an internal agreement. So the European Parliament is not going to conclude the agreement. So it's a big difference. That could be a good essay for Thursday. You know, the European Parliament is going to consent, is the same power to grant its consent or to withhold its consent from the trade agreement. So in case the European Parliament is taking the view that, okay, it's fine to have a trade treaty with the third countries, but that treaty is really breaching fundamental rights. It's breaching the rule of law. It's breaching, it's undermining human dignity. And the European Parliament will say, okay, no, there is an issue here. We cannot give consent because our electorates will criticize us as MPs, so we are going to lose the next elections. We are withholding our consent. So the European pressure is also placing much pressure on the negotiations because the Commission is also reporting to the European Parliament. So we are really facing a different arrangement, institutional arrangement than for the internal measures. But nevertheless, one can understand the importance played by the European Parliament also in this realm. Next slide, please. So that's really the difference between shared agreements and shared competence and exclusive competence. So the exclusive competence, the member states have no say, whereas for environmental competence, so the Paris Agreement on climate change that has been concluded by the EU and by the 27 member states, associations agreements, as I explained, have been concluded by the Commission, by the EU and the 27 member states. Really completely different pictures. That's important to understand. Next slide, please. Okay, to conclude with, since 1962, there is a custom unions. So I'm pretty much European. My father was half French, half Belgian. So my great-grandmother and her family lived in Paris. So my father in the 50s often had to cross the border to go to France and to come back to Belgium. And there was no custom unions in the 50s. So the custom officials, the Belgian and the French, were checking his goods to assess whether the goods were subject to specific tariffs. What happened in 1962 is that the six states decided to get into a custom unions. And so it means that instead of having 6 different tariffs, 6 different tariff codes, there's only one customs code, one single regulations imposing the same tariffs upon the import of Brazilian goods or Indian goods. And so that has been a significant achievement in the European integrations. Because the rates are similar and they just depend on the specific type of products imported. And so Turkey is part of a union customs with Europe, whereas Norway is not part. The UK, they decide to leave the EU, and in deciding to leave the EU, they decide also to leave the union custom. So it means that each time I'm ordering a book from Cambridge or from Oxford, I have to pay custom duties. So my books from England are much more expensive. Whenever I am purchasing a book from France or from Germany, I don't have to pay any custom duties because this is part of the union customs. So many businesses have been criticizing Brexit on the account that is hindering the export of foodstuff, of books to the European unions because they are outside of this union custom codes. Next slide. And so that's really what the issues we have with the new administration of the USA. So it's there is only one custom code, but there are nearly 2,000 custom office, be it in Hamburg, in Bremen, in Dunkirk, in Barcelona. And the national officials do handle the import, the export, so they will check whether the bananas from Costa Rica or from Haiti are subject to a specific duties or whether they can obtain derogations. And so it's really, although it's exclusive competence, it must be highly decentralized. Because the goods can be imported in Lisbon, they can be imported in Germany, or they can be imported in Italy. It's a very wide market, and so it makes sense. One single policy, but implemented by 27 national administration. Next slide, please. But to make the link with the cooperation policy, I began the second lecture and stressing the importance of the cooperation principle is that the EU within the CCP has been developed these generalized systems of preference aiming at sustaining the economics of developing countries in order to eradicate poverty. So it's a CCP regulations that provides a preferential access to the EU market to developing countries. And so their goods are subject of no tariffs or are subject to a very minimum tariffs. And so this is really done with a view to promoting good governance and sustainable development. And so this is a very specific scheme. Next slide, please. But within the GSDP, there are specific categories, one for low and lower income countries that encompass different Asian countries. I just took over the Asian countries, ranging from Afghanistan to Vietnam. But so there are partial removal of the custom duties. But what's really of importance is the GSP plus, which applies mostly for African countries. But regarding Asia, there are fewer countries. It's Mongolia, Pakistan, Philippines, and Sri Lanka. So why Pakistan, why India is not listed, I have no answer. But there is another arrangement that's much more interesting, and that covers Solomon Islands, Myanmar, Laos, Bangladesh. Well, the questions being discussed, okay, can we grant a special status to Myanmar when there are significant breach of laws and human rights in Myanmar? So I just ask you the questions. Next slide, please. Yes. Well, to conclude with, it seems to me that we succeed in wrapping the main pictures. So we are dealing with a union, not a confederation of states, not a federation of states. And what matters is the principle of conferral of powers. And the powers have been conferred by the 27 member states, but through very different arrangements. And the arrangements regarding the foreign and defense policies is completely different from the arrangements regarding the establishment and functioning of the internal market or the custom duties code. So the importance is really to identify what policy is at stake, because the choice of the policy really determines the ways in which the decision making is taking place. But I stop here. I'm listening to your questions or to your remarks.
Now you can ask if you have any question.
Maybe I have one then.
Hi, sir. I have a question.
Okay.
Yes.
So in the context of the CCP and the internal market, you had mentioned the ISDS. I'm a little confused about how it comes into play. So can you please repeat that point
Yes.
with regard to the ISDS mechanism?
Yes. Yeah, this is highly complex. There's been really a lot of litigation and still ongoing litigations regarding ISDS in Europe. So, ISDS was developed from 1962. The first treaties were Italy and Chad and Germany and Pakistan. So they were the first investment treaties providing for ISDS. So for the ones who are not familiar with international investment law, ISDS is the arbitrator. So the investors appoint its arbitrator. The defendant state appoints its arbitrators, and the two arbitrators appoint the president. And so the arbitral tribunal will adjudicate the case, the dispute between the investors that claims that one of its economic rights has been breached by the host state, so that its property has been expropriated, that there's been an unfair treatment. And so in 2004, 10 countries joined the EU, but before 2004, a number of German, Austrian companies, or even Belgian and Dutch companies started to invest in Poland, in Czechia, in Croatia to make business. There were main business opportunities. And the Western European countries concluded with Romania, with Poland, investment treaties providing for ISDS. And at the outset, nobody saw that there was a main problem. So there's been litigations between German companies or Dutch companies investing in Central Europe, and these disputes were adjudicated by often arbitral tribunals, be it in Stockholm, in Paris, or in Washington, D.C. And then somewhat 12 years ago, the European Commission realized that there was an issue. And the issue is fairly simple to understand. We succeed in achieving this internal market. The national court, the domestic courts, be it the Polish court, the Belgian court, the German courts, they are deemed to apply EU law. And whenever there is a doubt, they will refer a question to the Court of Justice of the EU. So why on earth a dispute between a Dutch company and the Slovakian authorities has to be adjudicated by American attorneys in Washington, D.C., when actually it's the business, is the job of the Eastern European country court to adjudicate the dispute. And so the international investment community at the outset said, no, this is internal law, the bilateral treaties have been concluded, this is falling within the internal legal realm, EU law has nothing to do with that. The European Commission defended put forward another argument. This is part of the internal market. So agreements concluded by states, by member states, must be valid, must be consistent with the fundamentals of the EU legal order. And the EU legal order, it's the fact of the matter is that the domestic courts have to adjudicate the disputes between the German investors and the member states authorities. And then finally, it went in a case known as ACMEA to the Court of Justice, and the Court of Justice handed down a landmark case and say, these bilateral treaties providing for specific ISDS for internal European disputes are invalid. They cannot be applied. It's running counter the principle of the general principles of EU law. So the member states were obliged to dismantle all the bilateral treaties. So there is no more ISDS regarding internal disputes in Europe. However, and that's much more complex, the member states have still more than 1,200 investment treaties with third states, with Asian countries. So for instance, there are 7 investment treaties with China. So it's member state with Chinese government or Chinese lawmaker. And many of these investment treaties provide for ISDS. And so the Court of Justice said there is no problem with this. This is okay, so long as the EU has not been concluding a treaty, an investment treaty with the third state. So regarding China, it means that no, there are 7 existing treaties. The European Commission has been negotiating an investment treaty for 10 years or 12 years with China. That treaty won't be concluded because there are too many obstacles. But in case this treaty is one day concludes, this means that all the bilateral agreements, investment agreement with China must be cancelled because it's exclusive competence, and exclusive competence means that these states have no rights whatsoever. So it's a bit paradoxical. So Belgium has, I think, an investment agreement with some sort, maybe South Africa or some African countries. With Congo, there is an agreement. So the ISDS there is valid. So a Belgian company investing in Congo can bring a claim before an investment tribunal based in Stockholm or in Washington, D.C., and that's valid under EU law. But Belgian firms investing in Croatia, losing its investment, cannot has to go has to bring its claim before a Croatian court. Was it clear enough?
Yes, sir. There's really a lot of things that I need to look into. So thank you. That was
Yeah,
really
there are different articles I wrote in English on the subject matter on my website.
yeah, sure.
My
Thank
website
you.
is trade versus environment. But I think I have stuff in English on this. If not, you send me an email and I will forward you the documents.
Surely. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Miss Federico Carlo Emanuele.
Yes, thank you, Professor. I just wanted to ask, do you think that the EU's strong engagement in development of humanitarian aid is genuinely value-driven, or is it simply the result of structural convenience? That is, that these are areas where unanimity between member states is not needed, or and so it makes them more politically safe than other initiatives.
Frankly speaking, I'm unable to cover 50 different policies and to know the specificities of each policy. Well, I'm reading several newspapers in different languages. I never saw any newspapers articles commenting upon strong oppositions. If there is an earthquake somewhere, the EU aid is dispatched immediately. So it seems to me that there is a strong commitment in supporting, but I'm unaware of the internal conflicts within the Council deciding this. So I imagine that the Commission is vested with immense powers in challenging and streamlining the foreign aids, in particular for human catastrophe. So it's a small question for a political scientist, for a lawyer. There must be conflicts, but I think that's what's really challenging with the EU legal order today. It's akin to a national legal order, but with nearly 500 million population with 27 members countries. So it's really challenging for academic to still have the overview and to understand how the different policies unfold.
I see. Thank you for your answer.
Any other question?
Yeah, maybe I have a remark. I realize that I still need to improve my slides, and so given that there will be these exams in Thursday, I would like to post online on my website, Indo-Pacific, all the slides, the new slides. So I need to improve them,
Yes.
but everything will be ready for Thursday. So to enable you, because it's really highly complex. To explain the conferral of powers is a key principle, and that there are different policies, and that's really of utmost importance. So of course the Indian scenario, it's quite simplistic. We are really falling within the ambit, the scope of the common commercial policy. Article 207 is extremely clear. So it's not an association agreement. This is a genuine trade agreement for the nature of the treaty, but I will try to come back to this issue tomorrow. That's all. Should we terminate the session?
Yes, we can end the session for today. So then we can begin tomorrow at
Yes.
At the 4 p.m. Indian time.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I speak also on behalf of Sébastien Fassiot. who did a fabulous job in wrapping up the complexity of the EU legal order in half an hour. And so we we will really work stage by stage in getting into more technical regulation. But of course, the key issue is to explain what's at stake, what's the rationale, what's the objective pursued by the lawmaker. But we will re-explain each time that's part of the CCP, or that's part of the environmental policy, or that's part of the energy policy. So what we've been stressing was really of utmost importance to understand the most technical aspects.
So still, do you have any questions or any doubt to ask? Or sir, do you have any homework for them? Any
No, but I really need to improve the slides. So that's just that requires a bit of reflections on my side.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So shall I close?
Can you stay online, and can we discuss in 5 minutes when everybody is
Yes,
gone?
let me stop the recording.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
I'll just a minute.